and then I'll get us going. So I'm going to jump right into it. I'm going to share my screen quickly, and I'm going to jump over to the syllabus. I highlighted some stuff. I want to start off with this, and then I'm going to go over to the course shell, but I would at least want to start off here. So we did finish up norm reference. You guys should be able to see my screen now. I think it popped up. Can you see it on your side? Okay. So we're going to start talking about, we're starting to prep for the CBM assessment report. So I've been talking to you guys about this for a couple weeks now and really encouraging you to go ahead and pick out a probe or assessment that you could use, and also encouraging you to maybe go ahead and start administering some of those. We really would like for you to have 5 to 6 data points. So in order to do that, that's why I was encouraging you to start that kind of in the middle of the process when you were working on that norm reference, so you would have plenty of time. So in the CBM report, I want to point out, and I highlighted this is on the rubric, and I highlighted it because I want to point it out. So we're going to add really an additional section compared to what you had in your report when you did the informal and also the norm reference. And so within that assessment report, we're actually going to add a section titled probe and intervention. So we're going to report a little bit, describe about the probe that you selected, a little bit about the rationale. So if I go back, you're going to see we're going to have the identifying information, which is going to include also the student background. So that pretty much is the same. Again, if you are using the same student on all these, there's no need to change the background information. You can continue using that. Okay. Don't reinvent the wheel if it's the same student. Okay. So this is the new section we're going to include. It's talking about the probe and the intervention that maybe you are selecting that you feel like might need to be implemented based on your student performance. So I gave you a website, told you could go to that if you wanted to select a probe. It had a variety of them. I don't know what your final determination was, if you're looking at something in reading, language arts, math, whatever it may be. So basically in this section, you're going to name and describe the probe that you're using. So on this, the CBM probe I selected was a math facts probe with a total of 20 questions, whatever it may be. You're going to give a description there. Then the rationale for it. Why did you decide to do that? Basically, you can connect it back to your 2 previous assessments. It's been a consistent maybe weakness that the student has displayed, and therefore you want to do some additional testing to get multiple data points. So it could be something as simple as that. And then describe the quantity and the frequency of probe use. And so basically been asking or instructing you to try to get 5 to 6 data points. So you're going to use it 5 to 6 times. That particular probe, you want to shift it around a little bit, same level of difficulty, but maybe not in the exact same order as far as the problems, but keep it the same level of difficulty. That way they don't memorize it. Then you would include the name and a description of the intervention used if one is necessary. The student maybe is progressing along really nicely as you are giving the probe multiple times, and the student really may not need intervention because you're seeing that upward progression when you're going to chart the data points. And so the student may not actually need it. The intervention could be is that needs to increase the level of difficulty. If they're progressing nicely, you can go ahead and change the level of difficulty as you move along. And if you do use an intervention, just kind of briefly discuss the rationale. The rationale could be after establishing a baseline, and you gave the first 2 probes, you saw the student's score was declining. And so that told you that perhaps the level of difficulty might have been a little bit too much, and you needed to drop it back somewhat and then re-administer a new probe based on a change in level of difficulty. Then explain any type of modification to the intervention. If If none, just explain. I did, basically the student progressed well, no need for an intervention. Just make simple statements. All you got to do on that. If you had to implement an additional intervention, you might explain why you did that or why you had to do it again. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be because the content is the level of difficulty is too much for the student based on their current grade level that they're performing at. That would be it. The data points are going to tell you that it first time or two you administer it. Okay. In question on that. It's really not anything that's got to be long and lengthy. It's basically going to be just an additional paragraph, and we're putting a header on there that's probe and intervention. That's all we're doing for this one. Okay, so that is the one difference.
I had one question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, I had a student who I was assessing at grade 4 level, and it's but I found through the norm referenced and through my informal assessment that she could comprehend up to a first grade level. So like I have been administering the CBM at a first grade level. Stop it, Penny. Sorry, that's my corgi right here. But then I noticed she also responded better to multiple choice questions, and the fast bridge that I was using, it's not set up that way. So I also like just was curious to see how she'd do on the CBM reading comprehension, and I noticed it had a multiple choice component to it. So I used that too.
Yeah.
And I guess I need to show that information. Would that be an intervention, or that I'm not sure what to
You're modifying it based on
modify?
your original format. So the way you're modifying it is you're switching over to a multiple choice.
Okay.
Yeah, and just explain, after you administered it, and based on previous assessments, you determine that modification for the intervention was needed, and your modification was switching over to multiple choice format.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, the next section there's going to be something a little bit different. And I mentioned this last week during our Zoom, and I'm actually going to pop up the report and show you. So when we provide a visual representation of the data, you guys have done that on the informal and the norm reference through the tables, charts, and graphs. Okay, and you guys have done a good job doing that. But this time for the CBM, we're going to ask you to add a specific visual representation in the form of a line graph, and we're going to ask you to show the baseline and the intervention line and what your aim line was. Okay, so we're throwing something new at you here, and I'm going to show you an example. I've actually got it posted in the Blackboard shell for the example of the assessment report. And so I'm going to kind of show you what that's going to look like to give you an idea. Okay, in just a minute, I'll switch over. So here, we're going to go ahead and continue to present our data in the raw data in tables, charts, and graphs, just like you've done. So you'll put a couple of those charts on there, just showing the raw data. Then we're going to ask you to add this item right here. It's worth 50 points. We're going to ask you to present it in a line graph with that baseline, the intervention, and the aim line. Okay. We're also going to ask you basically to explain your results like you've done in the first 2 reports that you've done for me and submitted those. And then highlighting strengths and weaknesses that you noticed by giving the CBM probes. Okay, so a lot of that is going to be very similar with the exception of this one additional line graph right here. Something else that's a little bit different in the reflection section, okay? For the CBM, we're asking you to provide at least 3 things that you learned about CBM through administering those. What are 3 things that you learned through this process of administering the CBMs. Okay. Those could be positive or those could be negative things. Okay. Sometimes a common point that I see on this, depending on what probe they used, is they found it to be if they were going to use this on an ongoing basis, that perhaps it might be a little bit time consuming for them. The next thing we're going to ask you to do is discuss, and this is basically just your personal feeling. There's no right or wrong to it, but just briefly discuss if you would use CBM again and why. Just kind of support your stance, whether you would or would not, with at least two pieces of data to support that. Okay. So after you go through this, you can just discuss, yes, I would use it again, or no, I would not, and then just briefly explain why you would or wouldn't. Okay. Again, on that, those two items, there's no right or wrong. It's just based on your personal feeling, based on your experience from doing it. Okay. So make sure you include those items right there. Okay. So again, I want to point out to you the definite changes compared to the first two is you're going to add an additional visual representation in the form of a line graph. And then down here in your reflection, you're going to provide at least three things that you learned through administering the CBMs. And then also just discuss whether you would use CBMs again or not, and explain why. Okay. Everything else is pretty much the same as far as what we're looking at within the body of the report. Any questions on those items there? That's why I highlighted them in yellow so I could easily point them out to you and you would see.
For the intervention line, does that imply that that is like a test result that is achieved via our intervention in some way, shape, or form?
So the intervention line, which I'm getting ready to show you when I switch over, you're going to show that on the graph where you had to intervene and provide an intervention. So let's say between the second probe and the third probe, their scores tanked off. I mean, they dropped drastically, and you had to put some intervention in place. Regardless of what it was, whether the intervention was dropping it back to grade level below or whatever it was, you're going to provide a line between data point number 2 and number 3 on that line graph. That's basically what the intervention line is. You're showing on the graph visually by providing a line between the data points where the student may be dropped off performance-wise. Does that answer your question, Miguel? Okay. And I'm getting ready to switch over on this. Is everyone good before I move off of this screen and pop up and show you what that line graph looks like? Everyone good? Okay, bear with me just a minute here. We'll get over to it. Okay. Screen should be visible to you now that I've shared. Everyone see it. Basically, it's looks like the previous report you've done. You're going to see a visual representation that's basically just showing the raw data. Does everyone see that? So far, everyone good? Here we go. I want to go up quickly. This is actually a copy of a report that was submitted to me several semesters ago. You can see back on this point here, the section that was added that I just described to you a while ago, the probe and intervention development. Okay, that's the new section that I just pointed out on the rubric. That's where it's added, where you see the identifying information. After that, they added in probe and intervention. And then it started on test results. Okay. Everyone good there? Seeing, you can see a link here that goes into the probe. I can give a description of it, talk a little bit about how the probe works, and they give an explanation on if they had to implement a modification. Here it says the only modification to the intervention was to stop writing a list after the fourth week. Okay. Providing the student with a specific topic forces him to use more brain power to perform with the same output as when he got to choose the topic. I want to point something out to you after the fourth week. Remember, this example that I am sharing with you was done back when this class was offered in a 16-week session before we switched over to an 8-week format. Okay. So we spent about 4 weeks, 5 weeks just on CBM. Okay. You got to remember it was a 16-week semester. So I just wanted to clarify that with you. Okay. Test results going through basically like you've done on the previous 2 assignments. We got charts here, graphs, tables showing raw data. Okay. We're going down. Here is an example of line graph showing the data points. Okay. Here is, they did some baseline. Again, this was, you got to remember, you can see more than 5 data points on here on this whole thing because we were again on a 16-week semester. Here they gave the first 3 to get a base, and you can kind of see it was kind of about 32, then it jumped up to about 42, and then down to 38. Okay. You see this line, Miguel, this is the intervention line. They gave the test initially, it jumped up, then it dropped off. Here's your first point, your second point, your third point, because there was a significant drop based on data point number 2. This particular graduate student drew their intervention line here between the August 30th test administration and the September the 4th. And they implemented their intervention right here. After they did that, they came in and gave the probe for data point number 4. Then there's data point 5, data point 6, data point 7, 8, and 9. Okay, so each of the data points is when the probe was administered. Okay, now the aim line or the aim score, after they did their intervention and saw the student was, the aim score basically is your projection of how the student or where you hope the student is going to end up. The aim score or the aim line ended at 60. Over time, over these 4 to 5 weeks, they started off at 30. So in 4 weeks, the student was projected to double their score, and they pretty much achieved it. They were just shy of that 60. Looks like they got about 58. Okay, so the orange line is the aim line. That's set by you based on their first couple of scores, any intervention, and then what you are projecting that they will score and end up at. So just you can create your aim line here. You can see they color coded it down here. Student score is the blue. Those are the data points there. Is there any question on that I can answer for you? Again, you're not going to have that many data points because this is condensed into 8 weeks. That's why I'm asking you to get 5. If you can get 6, that's great. But if you get 5, it's good.
I have I was wondering, since I had baseline data from the student at a grade 4 level, previous, just from last semester and earlier this semester before I was even thinking about this, is that okay to use that to establish a baseline?
You can. So some of you guys that have this student, you got access to their scores, and this came up in some previous Zooms. Oliver, I think you even brought it up, Matt, and posed the question to me a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
So if you have some of that data, you can certainly go back and pick
Okay.
out 2, 3 of those data points over here to kind of establish your base.
Okay.
If you see, Oliver, that students kind of, if they've been kind of up and down, you might put those data
Yeah.
points there and then say, okay, I'm putting that intervention line in there.
All right.
She
That makes sense.
dropped off, and that tells me now, based off this student you just explained to me, that you had to drop it back on their reading comprehension, correct? Or did I misunderstand what you were
No,
telling
yes, like dropped her down to grade
me?
1.
Well, your baseline initially might have been on that 4th grade because
Yeah.
that's you weren't for sure then. And so
Mhm.
you got 2 to 3 data points over here to try to establish your baseline and
Okay.
probably based on your student and just a little bit you told me, probably from the first to let's say the third, that line was a downward trajectory. I
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
guess based on what you're
Well,
telling.
she was like not able to even really complete it. I think it was related to the format of the test and the fact
Yeah.
that she's like not not nonverbal, but very limited in her oral
So
communications.
you would have your data points over here and you saw something was going on and you could put your intervention line.
Okay.
And then as you are in the narrative, if as you are explaining, you could describe the baseline and the intervention was based on observation. You had to change that format somewhat. A while ago, I told you that intervention basically was you were going to go in there and change it over to a multiple
Mhm.
choice and obviously drop that grade level
Mhm.
difficulty down somewhat so they could experience some success
Mhm.
and go upward from there.
Now, on the graph with changing the grade level, would I need to, I guess it's different because she's still like would be very much below grade level, but like
What?
I guess I'm wondering how to represent that on a
So
graph. I'm
you
not.
would just explain it in your interventions based on your baseline, and so you can also hear when you're given a description bigger too. Actually,
Okay.
I know on the left.
Just explain it in text. Explain the
Yeah,
graph in text.
in narrative, yeah, in narrative form,
Okay.
which you weren't last week. I popped up the comprehensive psychoeducational report, and that's the full report that's done after norm reference. And so you can look at the charts, and there's a lot of data. It's what Haley and I were just kind of reviewing a while ago because she said in a MEGS meeting, and you can look at charts and see right off the bat something was wrong based on if I was looking at your students' data, then this intervention line, and then all of a sudden they started off here and we start seeing it going up. You could
Hmm.
look at this graph with the background I've got and tell that you dropped off the level of difficulty considerably. And
Okay.
then go back up and narrative form where you explained it, my prediction should reflect your explanation in the narrative explanation.
Okay. All
Same way
right.
on comprehensive reports that I walked the group through with last week, and then Haley got to experience it firsthand in a MEGS meeting this week. Uh, they will correlate with each other. The narrative explanation should correlate with exactly the charts, tables, and graphs that are over there.
Okay.
And the longer you get into doing data collection, Oliver, and tracking it like this, you'll be able to start picking up on that and surmising, okay, hey, I can pretty much tell by looking at this what's happened
Hmm. Okay.
as you start doing more and more of this. You'll be able to see that everything kind of come together by looking at the table and the chart or the graph.
Okay.
So this right here, basically, guys, I wanted to show you that's what it looks like. You're just going on there and putting your data points and you're putting an intervention line. If you had to implement any type of intervention, you maybe won't have to. And if you don't, make sure that information down here when you're writing your description that there was no intervention that was necessary based on the student performance. Okay, and if you give your first two and then number three all of a sudden drops off, it's a good indicator it's probably going to be above too difficult for them. You drop it back on a grade level. Okay. Or if number two and three are consistently going downward. Any questions on that? Haley, clear as mud. Rebecca, Oliver. Again, it's just another visual representation. So when you sit down and you've collected all this data and you sit down with the team and you're looking at it, it's just another piece of the puzzle. Another piece putting everything together to determine what's going to be the best plan of action for the student. Okay. If you got multiple ongoing data points, it's pretty awesome. You can see the progression of your students, or you can see quickly if you give them a couple of the probes and the data point, the line is downward, that you need to make some adjustments pretty quick, that the material's too difficult for them. Okay. Any question on that? No? Everyone good? Yeah, just kind of wanted to briefly go over that wiki this evening. Next week, I will jump into, there is a slide deck on there I want to share with you next week. As we are kind of on the backside of CBM, just to kind of do a broad overview of IQ testing and adaptive behaviors. You guys have heard me talk about a little bit about the adaptive behavior skills. That's also included in the testing process and what their true purpose is, and also how that can be compared and correlate with IQ testing. And the IQ test itself, or the score, we often can get that through the WJ4. That's one that I use a lot. Any of those provides an IQ type score. On the WJ4, the Woodcock-Johnson, it's listed as GIA, General Intellectual Ability Score. Okay, but it also, the slide deck and conversation I'm gonna have with you next week on that when we get into it is kind of some of the misconception on IQ score and kind of how it's been misused over time. And one way it's been misused is when they go in and use it as a standalone score to determine placement, use that as one of the only factors, and that's not what it's intended for. So we're going to talk a little bit about that next week. How do you derive an IQ score? What all goes into that? How's it calculated? Okay. It's a very simple formula, but it's very complex to get there. And then once you have all your data, it's a very simple formula to come up with it. And I'll show you how it's calculated. So we'll get into that next week. Also, next week, I'm going to also go over quickly with you what all the mock IEP will be. I mean, we're getting down to the end, guys. We're in week 6 right now. So we'll get down to with that final assignment, which is the mock IEP, and that week 8, it's short week. So once the CBM report is due on March the 3rd, then you'll turn right around and on that following Wednesday, submit that IEP video. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the video next week and give you a kind of a guideline to follow to help you make sure you hit all your points in that video. And basically, it's just going to be presenting all the information as if you were sitting with the IEP team and presenting the data that you've collected by administering multiple assessments on your student. Okay. Any questions, kind of where we're at and where we're going the next 2 weeks?
Okay, I kind of have a question now after reading some of this example report. She's talking about like the percentile and things like that, which I don't think I would have that for my CBM. Like,
No,
do I just
no,
skip that part?
Kim. Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
Depending on
because
depending on what type of CBM you use. So you talk about this example that I'm sharing with you?
yeah, it's the one that's on your screen.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
So depending on the probe and all that, so you may
Okay.
not have.
Okay, because we were working on fluency, and so it was just like subtraction fluency.
Yeah, that's
And I
fine.
was like, yeah, okay,
You're good.
perfect.
You're good. You're fine. Any other questions? Rebecca, Oliver, you guys?
Yeah, so and the CBM is just we're still measuring the student against themselves, or are we measuring them
Yep.
against?
You're seeing how
Okay,
they're going.
okay, all right.
Now, on what Haley's talking about, you can go down and go through some steps to get percentile ranks, and that'll kind of give you an idea on how they compare it against other students. But right, really, the CBM, we're mainly concerned about how they are performing against themselves. Okay. Any other questions before we go? Everyone good? If you do, please feel free to send me an email if you do have questions on that. And again, next week I'll go over that slide deck on IQ testing, and then also on the adaptive behaviors, those scales, and then talk a little bit about the mock IEP to help you kind of get ready for that as you're on the back side of the CBM report, getting ready to turn it in. Okay. All right. Yes, I'll let you guys go. I appreciate it. Thank you for your time, and plan on seeing you next week on Wednesday. You guys have a good evening.
Thank you. Have a
Yes.
good evening.
Thank you.
Thank
Sorry
you.
for lacking a bit there. I just had some internet troubles. Sorry about that.
It's all right. No
right.
problem. I'll have it posted if you need it.
All right.